The dim amber glow of a quiet evening settles over the room like an uninvited boundary, casting long guarded shadows that split the space directly between our body and the body of the person we love. We sit across from them at the dining table or lounge on the opposite edge of a wide couch, our hands resting flat on our thighs, completely frozen in an attitude of hyper-vigilant restraint. The air between us feels strangely dense, heavy, and charged with an invisible friction, as if a transparent sheet of bulletproof glass has been dropped silently from the ceiling to isolate our nervous systems. We look at their face, but our gaze is no longer soft, warm, or receptive. It has become an intense, predatory microscope, tracking the microscopic shifts in their eyebrows, the tiny fluctuations of their jaw muscles, and the exact response times of their text messages like a volatile stock market ticker. We feel a dry, bitter taste of absolute self-control rising in the back of our throat, and a cold, protective knot tightening directly behind our navel. We are sitting within arm's reach of the person we desire most on this earth, yet we are completely alone, locked inside a private fortress of high-level calculation, refusing to offer a single, unscripted gesture or a raw, undefended feeling because a primitive, terrified voice inside our head whispers that if we drop our guard for even a single second, we will be utterly destroyed. We are a generation that has institutionalized the hyper-management of intimacy, transforming our hard-won psychological insights and relationship checklists into an industrial weapon to immunize our hearts against the risk of heartbreak. We no longer allow our close relationships to exist as wild, unmapped, and beautifully unpredictable landscapes to be explored with bare feet. Instead, we treat the open heart of another human being as a high-stakes risk mitigation project, where every word, every silence, and every casual gesture must be aggressively cross-examined for hidden red flags and compatibility deficits. We have weaponized pop psychology frameworks, attachment scripts, and boundary manuals to build a sophisticated buffer around our vulnerability, ensuring that we never step into the open foreground of a relationship without an ironclad exit strategy already fully drafted in our minds. We live under a collective neurosis that demands we balance the scales of emotional transaction with mathematical precision, calculating who cares more, who replied faster, and who holds the leverage in this immediate hour, completely blind to the reality that the very tools we are using to guarantee our emotional safety are the exact instruments that are suffocating the love we are starving to receive. The profound, agonizing tragedy of this modern condition is that we are living our entire romantic existence as the frozen, paralyzed players of the iron chessboard of the heart. If we step back and look at our situation with an unblinking clarity, we see that we are standing directly before a deeply desired partner, feeling a profound, primordial hunger to be truly seen, held, and accepted in all our raw human messiness. Yet instead of reaching out with empty, bare hands to touch their skin, we force the entire relationship to sit upon a cold, heavy, and massive iron chessboard suspended between our chests. We refuse to say a simple good morning, we refuse to confess a genuine longing, and we refuse to reveal a single vulnerable edge of our true nature without first calculating 40 moves ahead in our minds. We treat the spontaneous movement of love as a hostile military campaign, where every emotional expression must be a pre-calculated gambit designed to test the other person's loyalty before we commit a single piece of our own security. We spend our precious life force shifting heavy iron pieces across a rigid grid of defensive pride, turning a sacred space of human resonance into a clinical check and balance system, completely oblivious to the fact that while we are busy playing to avoid a checkmate, the living, breathing warmth of the connection is freezing to death upon the grid. Let us trace the cold, mechanical velocity of this control strategy through our daily relational micro-choices. We see it when we look at our text messages, where we deliberately hold back a spontaneous expression of affection, waiting for an exact number of hours to pass, before replying so that we do not appear too available or too desperate in the eyes of our partner. We see it when we enter an argument, instantly retreating into the sterile vocabulary of psychological detachment, using clinical terms to intellectualize our raw pain rather than letting our voices shake with the unpolished truth of our loneliness. We run endless safety testing scenarios on our loved ones, creating artificial hurdles and tracking their facial expressions during casual conversations to see if they will fail our internal criteria, treating them as a suspect under surveillance rather than a sovereign human being to be met in the open air. We have turned our intimacy into an accountancy firm, keeping a strict, unwritten ledger of emotional debts, ensuring that we never match their step until they have provided a lifetime guarantee of absolute fidelity. We make ourselves the hyper-vigilant strategist of our own isolation, wrapping our hearts in a thick lacquer of preemptive defense so tightly that the spontaneous current of real love cannot find a single pore through which to enter our flesh. The deep, inescapable horror of this over-managed intimacy is that it operates as a self-fulfilling prophecy of absolute abandonment. The analytical mind believes that by maintaining the iron chessboard, it is keeping us safe from the catastrophic shame of unrequited love or unexpected rejection. But if we observe the mechanical feedback loop in real time, we discover a devastating truth. Our control strategies actively manufacture the exact distance we are terrified of experiencing. By keeping our partner pinned beneath a clinical checking system, by treating their natural silences as immediate threats, and by refusing to move our pieces until they surrender their autonomy, we dry out the organic, unpredictable warmth that allows a human connection to breathe. Our hypervigilance behaves like a cold wind that forces the other person to instinctively pull their own blanket around their chest, causing them to withdraw their warmth, which our analytical intellect then immediately flags as absolute, definitive proof that we were right to keep our guard up in the first place. We are suffocating the living bird of love within our tight iron fingers, and when it finally stops singing, we console our lonely spirit by praising ourselves for our brilliant accuracy, completely blind to the reality that we are the ones who killed the song. To observe how this permanent fortress of emotional calculations structures our immediate reality, we must examine an archetype that has become the dominant nervous system of the modern relationship, the figure of the hypervigilant strategist, the permanent accountant of the heart. This is the version of us that has transformed emotional self-defense into a high-level art form, wrapping our fear of rejection in the respectable terminology of modern relationship psychology. On the surface, this strategist appears exceptionally mature, grounded, and emotionally intelligent. They are the ones who pride themselves on never losing their cool, who talk calmly about secure attachment styles, and who know exactly how to establish sophisticated boundaries at the first sign of relational friction. They present themselves as healthy, self-sufficient individuals who refuse to be swept away by reckless, romantic impulses, convincing everyone around them that their extreme restraint is a sign of profound self-respect and psychological stability. But if we descend past this polished strategic surface and enter the private, frozen theater of their interior world, we find a human spirit that is completely locked in a state of chronic, agonizing isolation. The hypervigilant strategist is not practicing healthy boundaries. They are using pop psychology frameworks as a sterile clinical shield to avoid the terrifying, groundless vulnerability of real human contact. They live under an unexamined subterranean belief that states, if I remain the one who calculates, if I never allow myself to need you more than you need me, I can permanently control the narrative and save myself from the humiliation of being left behind. They treat the open heart of their partner not as a sacred field of resonance, but as an unpredictable stock market to be continuously outmaneuvered, maintaining a permanent, subtle exit strategy in their mind, even while sharing a bed. They spend decades analyzing the mechanics of connection from behind a thick wall of clinical safety, entirely blind to the reality that they are drying out on the shore of their own calculation, using the very blueprints of emotional intelligence to construct an ironclad prison of absolute loneliness. While the conscious intellect is busy framing this continuous vigilance as a sign of high wisdom or relational mastery, our physical body is keeping a remarkably precise, painful record of the immense structural strain required to maintain this lateral defense. The body does not understand the abstract narrative of safety testing. It only knows the raw, immediate physical compression required to hold back a wave of genuine love. When we perform a detailed somatic mapping of the hypervigilant strategist, we see that the iron chessboard of the heart has physically engineered our muscles to freeze our vitality in midair. The primary center of this physical deformation can be felt directly within our eyes and the surrounding ocular ring. If we bring our awareness to the tiny muscles around our eye sockets right now, we will notice a chronic, microscopic squinting, a sharp, cold compression in the brow line and the outer corners of the eyelids. This is the physical architecture of the predatory scan. Our eyes have forgotten how to rest in a soft, open, and panoramic view of our partners. Presence, they are permanently focused in a state of clinical checking, watching their micro-expressions for any sign of withdrawal or emotional shift. This chronic ocular tension signals to our ancient amygdala that we are standing in a hostile territory where a single misstep could be fatal, keeping our nervous system flooded with a low-grade, toxic drip of adrenaline that keeps our thoughts humming with a frantic background static of defense, strategy, and justification. Dot from the eyes. This current of structural bracing travels downward and clamps with immense violence directly into our ribcage and the intercostal muscles that wrap around our heart center. When we live as a permanent relationship accountant, our chest walls are forced to adapt to a state of chronic, high-level hypervigilance, turning our ribs into a rigid iron birdcage that restricts the heart's organic expansion. If we observe our breathing pattern in this exact second, we will notice that our ribcage is held in a tight, protective corset that prevents it from expanding sideways or moving fluidly with the natural tide of our feelings. We are emotionally holding our breath, keeping our chest structurally defensive to shield a vulnerable, raw wound of perceived unworthiness. This chronic constriction cuts off the warm, spacious flow of energy through our torso, keeping our breath shallow, high, and panicked within the upper third of the lungs, ensuring that our heart remains physically insulated from the spontaneous warmth of the person sitting across from us. The most paralyzing and hidden manifestation of this somatic freezing is localized deep within our solar plexus and our hands, where the body controls our instinctual ability to reach out or pull backward. When we fall into the trap of overmanaged intimacy, a tight, coiled knot of cold resistance establishes itself directly behind our navel, paired with a subtle, permanent clenching in our fingers. Our hands are no longer empty. Soft instruments of spontaneous touch, they are held in a state of high-alert preparation, ready to pull backward at the very first hint of an emotional shift or a delayed response from our partner. We hold our palms tight, our fingers curled slightly inward, a physical posture that mimics a soldier keeping their hands on their weapons while negotiating a temporary truce. This physical rigidity is the somatic expression of our deep refusal of love's unpredictable groundlessness. We are holding our upper limbs in a state of permanent arrest, a physical containment that makes a simple, unscripted embrace or a raw confession feel like a terrifying plunge off a vertical cliff face, choosing the clean, sterile safety of a cold grid over the muddy, ecstatic reality of a fully surrendered heart. This systemic physical tightening feeds directly back into a toxic, looping psychological feedback loop that grows more sophisticated with every relationship manual we read and every checklist we memorize. Because we have linked our security to our ability to outmaneuver the other person, the analytical mind begins to view our partner's natural human imperfections as lethal threats to our survival. The moment they experience a wave of ordinary distraction, a busy week at work, or a momentary dip into emotional silence, the inner strategist instantly flags these experiences as proof that the relationship is unsafe. The mind whispers, "See, they are pulling away. They are not meeting your needs. You must go back to the chessboard and pull your pieces back into a defensive grid before you get hurt." To escape the phantom shame of rejection, we unconsciously begin to sabotage our own connection, withholding our true faces behind a thick lacquer of performative detachment, refusing to match their step until they provide an absolute, lifetime guarantee of safety. We are actively punishing our loved ones for the crime of being human, sacrificing the brilliant raw currency of our present intimacy to maintain an illusion of control, completely blind to the reality that trying to force a wild human soul into a static, secure piece on a chessboard is a slow act of emotional suicide, and that the only relationship we will ever have is the beautifully unpredictable, unmapped encounter that is breathing in the open foreground of this very room right now. To completely slice through this complex, self-perpetuating fortress of defensive checking, we must bring the razor-sharp, cool surgical steel of the Buddha's insight directly into the center of our emotional theater, using it to dismantle the absolute illusion that we can force the wild, unmapped landscape of intimacy into a secure, predictable calculation. 2,500 years ago, standing perfectly naked beneath the open sky, a human being mapped the exact mechanical trap where our desperate search for relational security becomes the ultimate executioner of our capacity to love. He did not frame our fear of heartbreak as a modern attachment disorder, to be managed with more sophisticated checklists. He exposed our refusal to tolerate the basic groundlessness of intimacy as the supreme architect of our internal samsara. When we look across the space of our relationship and confront the fundamental truth that another human being is entirely free, separate, and unpredictable, we are being struck by the first arrow of reality. This first arrow is the clean, unalterable law of impermanence. Anicca, expressing itself through the living psychology of a relative ego. The person we love is not a fixed, static object that we can purchase, insure, and lock inside a cabinet of emotional safety. They are a fluid, ever-changing weather pattern, navigating their own unmapped cross-currents of fear, history, exhaustion, and joy. They may have a bad day and look at us with cold, distracted eyes. They may change their perspective on a random Tuesday. They may get overwhelmed by their own interior winter and pull away into silence. They may even, at some point on this unmapped journey, break our hearts and walk away. This is the baseline groundlessness of love. It is the raw, neutral condition of opening our chest to an external entity that we cannot control, and it contains zero inherent suffering. It is simply the wild, organic price of admission to the human experience. But the modern mind, completely possessed by the neurosis of overmanagement, refuses to let the landscape remain neutral. The moment we notice a microscopic drop in their emotional temperature or a 3-hour delay in their response, we reach back into our internal quiver, pull out a second arrow, and drive it with immense screaming violence directly into the exact spot where the first arrow landed. This second arrow is our mental criminalization of their freedom. It is the internal strategist that roars. Because they are silent, you are being abandoned. Because love is unpredictable, you must control it with an iron fist. You must manage their expressions, Hide your raw vulnerability and never let them see your real needs until they provide a lifetime guarantee of absolute safety. If we look closely at our lives right now, we will see that the profound exhaustion breaking our spirit is never caused by the actual presence of distance in our relationships. It is entirely manufactured by the devastating infection of this second arrow. The first arrow is the natural groundlessness of love. The second arrow is our arrogant, defensive demand that another human being become a dead, predictable piece on our chessboard to protect us from our own fear. We turn a beautiful, ordinary evening into a clinical interrogation room, sitting across from our partner, while our minds violently whip us for failing to possess a certainty that does not exist anywhere in nature. To shatter the very foundation of this second arrow, the Buddha's wisdom requires us to look directly into the nature of the entity we are trying so desperately to protect with our iron grid. The concept of the separate endangered self, the illusion he completely deconstructed through the realization of non-self, anatta. The hyper-vigilant strategist operates under the false assumption that inside our chest sits a solid, fragile monument called me that must be hyper-defended against the outside world, and that our partner is a separate, potentially hostile trader entering an emotional transaction. We believe that if we calculate 40 moves ahead, hold back our text messages, and maintain a permanent exit strategy, we can successfully immunize this solid monument from the pain of rejection, keeping our ego pristine and undefeated. But wisdom points to a completely different, liberating reality. The separate, terrified ego we are trying to shield behind our chess pieces is nothing but a phantom made of old childhood memories, archaic defense mechanisms, and conceptual conditioning. There is no solid entity inside your chest that can be broken by another human being. Your fundamental nature is not a fragile glass sculpture, but the vast, empty sky of awareness itself. The sky does not need to build an iron grid to protect itself from the passing storm clouds. It simply allows the lightning, the rain, and the wind to roll through its expanse, completely untouched by the weather. When we realize that our core awareness has never been traumatized, has never been rejected, and cannot be depleted by the choices of another, the violent compulsion to manage intimacy completely evaporates. We see that there is no separate other to outmaneuver, because love is not an iron transaction between two defensive castles, but a single fluid and unconditioned field of awareness, where two rivers meet to share the same water. When we bring the unblinking light of this insight into the center of our connection, the entire iron chessboard instantly dissolves into the void, because we realize that trying to force a wild human soul into a static, secure piece on a grid is a slow act of spiritual suicide. We see that the only way to experience the profound warmth we are starving for is to step completely off the grid and walk into the open meadow with empty hands. We stop treating our partner as a suspect under surveillance and begin to meet them as a sovereign mystery to be discovered anew in every single breath. We drop the ledger of emotional debts, we smash the clinical safety nets, and we allow our hearts to beat in the wide-open foreground of life without a script, a shield, or a defensive exit strategy. We stand fully erect in the groundlessness of the present hour, resting in the unshakable, unconditioned realization that our capacity to love is our true security, and that by surrendering our weapons, we are not losing our power, but finally returning to the clean, unshielded majesty of what it means to be truly alive. To transition from the intellectual release of our defensive strategies into a lived, cellular liberation, we must enter the raw, physical construction site of our own somatic architecture. We cannot calculate our way out of the iron chessboard of the heart, because the analytical mind is the very engine that measures the grids, tracks the response times, and orders our feelings back into a state of hyper-vigilant defense. The poison of over-managed intimacy is written in the dense, silent language of our muscles, manifesting as a sharp, microscopic squinting of the ocular ring, a literal clamping down of the intercostal chest walls, and a tight, coiled knot of cold resistance directly behind our navel. To rewrite this programming, we must bring the steady, warm laser of our embodied presence directly into the physical coordinates, where these defensive reflexes are anchored. This architecture of transformation requires us to master 3 distinct, daily inner practices that allow us to soften the ocular scan, melt the iron birdcage around our heart, and execute the radical act of first-move vulnerability within the wide-open foreground of our relationships. The first foundational pillar of this real-world alignment is the systematic practice of softening the ocular scan and establishing the panoramic welcome, because the hyper-vigilant strategist archetype has spent years training our eyes to focus in a narrow, predatory, and checking stance, constantly evaluating our partner's micro-expressions for signs of emotional withdrawal, must perform a deliberate somatic intervention to return our vision to its natural state of open receptivity. We engage this practice whenever we feel that familiar, obsessive itch to audit a loved one's posture, or when we notice our brow tightening as we wait for them to speak during a moment of relational tension. We begin by sitting or standing perfectly still across from our partner, allowing our spine to align itself naturally with the gravity of the earth. We do not pull our shoulders back in a military stance, we let them drop heavily away from our ears. We close our eyes for a brief moment and bring our awareness directly into the tiny, intricate muscles that wrap around our eye sockets, stretching across the bridge of the nose and out toward the temples. We imagine a warm, soothing fluid pouring directly into these tissues, melting the sharp, cold compression in the orbicularis oculi. We consciously invite our eyeballs to drop backward into their sockets, letting them rest heavily in the dark, quiet velvet of the skull, completely abandoning the modern compulsion to track, evaluate, or outmaneuver. When we open our eyes, we do not allow our gaze to harden into a narrow point of focus upon our partner's face. Instead, we deliberately practice the panoramic welcome. We keep our head perfectly still and expand our visual field outward to the extreme periphery, allowing ourselves to become aware of the entire space, simultaneously the walls to the left and right, the floor beneath their feet, the texture of the air between us, and the shifting light in the room. We do not look at our partner as an object under surveillance. We let their entire form wash over our vision as a part of a single relaxed sheet of awareness. This panoramic expansion instantly signals to our ancient amygdala that the predatory hunt is over, that we are not under evaluation, and that we are safe enough to drop our shield. The low-grade drip of adrenaline in our tissues dries up, the frantic background static of strategy vanishes, and our mind returns to its natural state, clear, spacious, and completely receptive, allowing the other person to exist in our presence exactly as they are, without being pinned down by our judgment. This ocular softening provides the deep, somatic grounding required for our second discipline, melting the iron birdcage through the unshielded breath. This is the art of breathing directly into the tight intercostal muscles of our chest, unlocking the ribcage, and letting the heart expand forward into the open air without the armor of a pre-calculated safety net. Whenever we sit near our loved one and feel that sudden, heavy wall of containment rising behind our sternum, that literal physical clamping of our respiratory wall, we do not run away from the discomfort, and we do not try to compensate by intellectualizing our boundaries. Instead, we place one palm flat against the center of our breastbone, right over the heart, and the other palm flat against our lower abdomen. We close our eyes and breathe a long, slow inhalation directly into our chest walls, focusing our attention on the tiny muscles that run between our ribs. We do not hold our torso rigid. We imagine the inhalation as a gentle, expanding fire that is melting the cold iron bars of the birdcage from the inside out, forcing the ribs to expand sideways and open like the petals of a wild lotus. As we hold the breath for a short, comfortable pause at the top of the movement, we recognize that the separate, endangered ego we are trying to protect with our chest armor is nothing but a phantom made of old memories. On the exhalation, we let out a soft, audible sigh through an open mouth, and we mentally visualize our protective shields dropping straight down onto the floor like heavy iron plates, leaving our chest completely bare, transparent, and unshielded. We repeat to ourselves silently, "There is nothing to defend. I am the sky, not the weather." We watch the cold knot behind our navel soften, spread outward, and dissolve back into the warm matrix of our body. We are teaching our nervous system a radical new truth, that true safety is not achieved by locking our heart inside a clinical prison, but by becoming so open, so vast, and so groundless that a passing emotional shift from our partner can pass through our chest like wind through an open window, leaving zero wreckage behind. This internal clearing opens the way for our third and most revolutionary discipline, the radical act of first move vulnerability. This is the art of dropping the chessboard in real time, by learning to speak the raw, unpolished truth of our immediate feeling, confessing our fear, our love, or our desire without waiting to see if the other person has matched our move first. We begin to practice this sovereignty by intentionally entering the moments of our relationship where we have previously practiced the high-level accountancy of emotional withholding. If we are sitting across from our partner, and a wave of deep affection or sudden insecurity ripples through our awareness, we refuse to open our internal manual to check if it is safe to speak. We do not look at the invisible scoreboard. We do not wait 3 hours to balance the transaction. We unlock our diaphragm, look our partner directly in the eyes with a soft panoramic gaze, and we let the raw truth drop out of our mouths, right through the center of our breathing. We say, "I am feeling a little lonely right now," or "I love you so much in this moment that it makes my chest shake," or "I am terrified of losing this connection." We do not speak these words to manipulate a specific response or to force them into a countermove on the chessboard. We release our vulnerability as an unconditional offering to the space between us, completely unconcerned with whether they match our vulnerability or pull away into silence. We let our hands rest open on our lap, palms facing upward, a physical posture that signals an absolute surrender of all weapons and control strategies. We do not wait for the fear of rejection to vanish before we act. We allow the anxiety to rattle through our ribs like a sudden storm, while our spine remains straight, light, and completely anchored in its own primordial authority. We are practicing the high art of spontaneous resonancy, clean, raw courage to let our heart beat in the wide-open foreground of life without a script, a buffer, or a defensive exit strategy. By practicing this radical devotion to the immediate present, the chronic paralysis that has kept us frozen in a clinical check and balance system completely evaporates. We discover that we do not need a lifetime guarantee from another human being to experience the fullness of love. Our own unshielded presence is its own baseline, its own temple, and its own infinite security, allowing us to move through our intimacy not as a terrified accountant trading pieces for safety, but as an awakened force of nature that can stand fully naked in the groundlessness of love and find it beautiful. When we finally kick over the iron chessboard and allow our weapons to drop heavily onto the floor, a magnificent, weightless stillness cascades through every single layer of our physical and psychological frame. This stillness is not the cold, dead silence of a relationship that has grown numb through mutual detachment, nor is it the fragile peace of two castles maintaining a permanent truce behind fortified walls. It is the immense, radiant, and organic presence of a wide-open meadow that has forgotten that grids and calculations ever existed. The sharp, microscopic squinting in the muscles surrounding our eye sockets dissolves into a soft, open field of panoramic welcome, allowing us to see our partner not as a volatile market to be tracked, but as a living, breathing mystery to be encountered. The rigid iron birdcage around our heart melts away entirely, spreading a deep, penetrating warmth down through our intercostal space, and our breath falls effortlessly into the open belly, moving with a clean, spontaneous rhythm that does not need a single safety check to justify its depth. The physical reality of the immediate room rushes back into our consciousness with an exquisite, hyper-saturated texture that reveals our old, hyper-managed strategies to be nothing but a pale, mechanical hallucination. The ambient light catching the curve of our partner's shoulder, the quiet hum of the evening air moving between our bodies, and the raw, unscripted space of the foreground feel remarkably alive, dense with an intrinsic value that can never be measured by an accountancy ledger. We look at the person sitting across from us, and we no longer view them through the distorting lens of our childhood fears or our defensive checklists. We see them exactly as they are, in the absolute presenter, separate, free and fluid human soul who has chosen to share this specific hour with us on a completely unmapped journey. The agonizing necessity to maintain a permanent exit strategy or to test their loyalty before we offer our warmth completely evaporates, leaving our spirit to sit firmly in the center of its own nakedness with an unassailable, uncontrived dignity. This is the state of spontaneous resonance, the profound cellular realization that your fundamental security in a relationship is not achieved by outmaneuvering the other person, but by becoming so groundless, so vast, and so entirely empty of defense that there is nothing left inside your chest for rejection to destroy. We have returned to our own sovereign coordinate. We have stopped using the precious, finite currency of our intimacy to buy false safety nets from an analytical mind that cannot love. And we have allowed ourselves to step out into the wild weather of real contact. We see that when we surrender our weapons, we are not making ourselves weak, we are unlocking the unconditioned indestructibility of our baseline awareness, which cannot be depleted, diminished, or broken by the choices of another human being. We can hold our partner's gaze with empty, open hands, letting our hearts beat in the open air without a script, a shield, or a defensive strategy, moving together through the fluid landscapes of closeness and distance, like two rivers sharing the same unmapped valley. In the deep, luminous maps of the insight tradition, the Buddha continuously pointed away from the frantic control strategies of the ego hitch, seeks to conquer its fear by clinging to static forms and manipulating the external world, and directed our focus toward the boundless, untamed space of non-clinging, upadana. He reminded us that true liberation is never achieved by trying to force a wild, impermanent universe to sit perfectly still upon a grid of psychological certainty, but by dropping the ledger entirely and learning to rest within the fluid cross-currents of life with an unshielded heart. He invited us to abandon the heavy burden of constant calculation, to stop treating the sacred resonance of human connection as a commercial transaction of emotional safety, and to step into the open field of existence with absolute pristine presence, resting in a self-authority that is complete within its own skin. The shadows in our room have lengthened now, softening the boundaries of the furniture and blending our physical coordinates with the quiet expanse of the night. The iron chessboard has dissolved completely into the void, its heavy pieces and rigid lines vanishing like smoke in a clear sky, leaving nothing between our chest and their chest but a clean, empty space filled with the natural warmth of our breathing. Our hands rest open on our lap, palms facing upward in a gesture of absolute, unconditioned surrender, a physical posture that signals to the entire universe that the war against groundlessness is permanently over. We are no longer playing a game to avoid checkmate. We are no longer running safety tests. From behind a clinical wall, we are simply here, breathing in the wide-open foreground of this relationship, loose, erect, and entirely alive in our undefended skin. If you finally kicked over the iron chessboard and allowed your raw, unpolished heart to beat in the wide-open foreground of this relationship without a single safety net, if you dropped the ledger of emotional debts and stood perfectly naked in the beautiful, unmapped groundlessness of love, who would you be in this very unshielded second?